So, welcome to the Political Studies Association Teaching and Learning Network webinar with Thomas Da Costa Vieira from the University of Leeds, talking about Gen AI and assessments in politics. So, over to you, Thomas. Looking forward to this.
All right. Okay. Hi. All right. Today I'm going to be presenting on some thoughts and some recent research on how we can approach um, the use of GenAI by our students in politics and IR specifically, especially because there is a bit of a lack of a literature on politics and IR specifically on this topic. And so essentially, this is what I'm going to argue. First, I'm going to argue that AI proofing assignments in politics and AR is quite difficult, even highly difficult. That said, that attempts can and should be made to AI proof our assignments. These attempts may not succeed, but on average, I believe that they should still be pursued because they might have some results. And from experience, they do have some positive results, not just for AI use, but for pedagogical innovation more broadly. So they have pedagogical and other benefits that we should pursue anyway. So that's like another way of seeing it. Ultimately, though, if we want to face AI a little bit more efficiently and forcefully, we're going to need to rethink some of our learning and teaching, learning, and assignment design, and just like our broader approach to higher education at the university. So the contents are quite simple. First, I'm going to review a little bit of what we know actually about how students use AI. And I'm going to compare then what we can expect students to achieve with or without AI versus what the AI can do, which then allows us to think about what kind of frontiers remain in terms of what we can actually assess without risking too much AI use by students. So I'm calling this like the AI assessment frontier. The second part, I'm gonna then like take lessons from that review of the literature and of the current situation. Then I'm gonna make a few recommendations or like a list of a few principles that we can try and implement in our assignment design. And then some examples from our very own teaching here in the Global Political Economy group at Leeds, including some assignments that I've designed myself. And then further reflecting a little bit about how we can go beyond all of this, to a broader pedagogical approach with and without AI, both at the same time, towards a better environment and material and overall approach that can mitigate and play with AI. So just a word on methods. Everything you will see in the paper or in the presentation is based on one, existing literature, second, observations that I've made and provisional results or long standing results in teaching and marking assignments and in unofficial discussion with students, let's say. And finally, original research that I've conducted about slash with GenAI itself, so Copilot and ChatGPT in particular. So thinking with and without the AI itself to design and test research ideas, teaching ideas, assignment ideas, and just wider conversations, testing safeguards and just the limits of what the AI can and cannot do. So, for the first part, I would like to just give you a recap because not everybody has like a clear understanding of what students actually use AI for, what the consequences are, and what we can basically expect there. So the first thing is, as time goes on now, we can expect that most students have increasingly a sophisticated and quite like relatively nuanced understanding of AI. They see how useful it can be. They're very well aware of its limitations and of its problems and damages. So, that said, though, they do use AI a lot. We're close to, in most surveys, 80 or 90% of students in most contexts using AI, at least in some capacity, although it varies widely. But Essentially, students use AI to do a range of things such as searching for information, writing, summarizing readings, paraphrasing readings, creating drafts, outlines, generating ideas, and actual writing, full-fledged writing of their essays, of course. Something that they do increasingly is that they write themselves or they use AI to write, and they do this like hours long back and forth of generating text and editing it or asking the AI to edit it and just having a little bit of their footprint in it and mixing things together, but with a big AI footprint sometimes, not always, of course. Uh, what we also know is the views of students on AI and universities. Overall, students think that the majority of students think they're not prepared for AI use and the AI world, and also that universities are failing in that matter. So they want more AI knowledge and skills. They want to be prepared for the AI workplace, and they want more teaching, training, and learning on AI. And also, they want to be involved. At least that's what they say. They want to be involved in AI teaching, training, and learning. They want to be involved in the design or at least the discussion of AI guidelines at university. They do not want AI generated courses or AI teachers for the most part. Some do, but most don't. And they do not want themselves and the people that teach them to use AI too much and to become over reliant on it because they're really well aware that this is a problem. So all of this together, you have a sort of practice where the boundary between human and non-human writing and learning and teaching is starting to disappear, especially when it comes to writing. In the words of one of my students, sometimes people don't even remember which parts came from the AI and which parts came from them when they're writing an essay, for instance. So we have to really, you know, accept that reality. It's not always the case, but it is increasingly the case. The consequences, of course, as we increasingly know, are bad for cognition, decline in memory recall, and lower levels of brain activity, lower capacity to problem solve. The big issue that I wrote here on the slide is that when humans, including ourselves, use AI too early in the thinking and writing process, it basically creates this, it's even more than a shortcut. It's the destruction or erasure of the early thinking process, the building blocks that lead to understanding, reflection, the making of messages and arguments. And that's really what we want to avoid. Oops, sorry. So that's the key thing in terms of actual thinking. And more widely, there's a problem that using AI basically you know pushes back or even extinguishes curiosity and wonder and wandering around in your thoughts and the exploration that's inherent to academic thinking. And ultimately, it reduces enjoyment and the sense of ownership over assignments and over learning in general, and thus ultimately in the courses in which they're engaged in the wider subject area. And especially we want to avoid this building up and becoming systematized in our students because it creates feedback loops in the brain and in the psychological and social practices of our students because it sort of builds these shortcuts to learning and it reinforces the brain's desire for these shortcuts in thinking and learning. And we really want to avoid that kind of loop. So, we need to, this is how they use it in the consequences, but we need to have a very good and a continuously evolving understanding also of what AI can actually do, and therefore how students will use it and the fact that they will use it to do the things that it can do, because they are up to date with this, so we need to be up to date. On the other hand, we also need to be agreed, to have a common agreement on what can be expected of students with and or without AI. This common agreement realistically is not going to be sectoral because there's just too much variance. It's not even going to be at university level, I suspect. I don't think that's possible either. I think it's going to be We need to cultivate it within schools and within departments even, and even within that, within subgroups in schools and departments that teach different cohorts, because we need to acknowledge actually not all cohorts in the same departments are similar, depending on UG, PG, international, domestic students, etc. So, what the AI is currently able to do, and this is really important to know. At this point in time, in late 2025, AI can now digest and read entire pieces of texts, summarize them extremely well, extract specific insights if the user asks it to do with page numbers and actual quotes even, integrate anything essentially from readings into arguments quite seamlessly. It can now apply most social science theory to evidence, especially politics and IR theory, to evidence very easily. It can reflect critically on the topic. It can reflect on its own writing, on the writing of others, including the best scholars. It can apply theories and compare theories and concepts and etc. It knows and it uses the work of most scholars that we teach very well at this point. Can make mistakes, sure, but the mistakes are often like relatively high level. And I mean relatively, but compared to what we ask students to master and what they can realistically achieve, it does really well and quite fine, to be frank. AI can also access publicly available data that's been already processed in most cases. So policy reports or government websites like, I don't know, UK Companies House. And it can extract it and it can analyze it on the spot. It can analyze raw data with very few mistakes, like you put an Excel data in it, it can do that. And importantly, for essay writing and assignments in general, it can make a good, consistent argument and stick to it and defend it, which it wasn't able to do a year or a year and a half ago. So that means essentially at this point in time, in my estimation, from marking and also generating essays, myself in my research, I estimate that AI can almost on its own or on its own write essays that are increasingly closer to something like a 65, 68, possibly even a first sometimes. Where just a year ago, when Leah Owen and Matthias Dilling presented their research to us and wrote their paper, they graded essays, and the AI could not make a consistent argument and was going in all sorts of directions and was more closer to a 58, 62 average. But they were already noting at the time that this was only increasing. So, um, this is what the AI can do. What it cannot do, maybe at the moment, is it cannot access data that is either not publicly available or if it is available, that is raw, unprocessed, like Excel sheets and things like that. It cannot develop new theory, although it is getting quite good at that because it's getting increasingly good at like cross-referencing and combining literature and concepts and different works. And in the test that I've done this year, if guided by an expert in a field, or even not even an expert, but someone that's quite well read in a literature, it can identify things that haven't been done before increasingly and combine different concepts that haven't been combined yet. And of course, it makes mistakes, and some of it is really fuzzy and it's not really clear and whatnot. But when you push it and you bring your own insights, it can do that increasingly. And of course, it might be able to do it in ways that are convincing enough, even if inaccurate or fuzzy and just not perfect. It can be coherent enough and convincing enough, especially for someone grading an assignment. Students are not yet using it that way, but they might. So this is what the AI can and cannot do. And then we need to contrast that with what students can and cannot do, or at least what they can be expected to do on average, again, because every student cohort is different. So we can expect, and we have expected students in the past when writing assignments in politics and IR to apply theory to evidence, to reflect critically on the topic, on their own writing, on the writing of others, to make an argument, to stick to it, to apply theories and compare them, to know the work of the scholars that we teach quite well, to research original data and to use it for their analysis. So that's what so far we have expected to. But then, when we compare this to what the AI can do, it's strikingly similar. So if we push our students, or can we push our students, we need to ask the questions such as, can we actually ask our students to know the material and make arguments from it better than what ChatGPT, for instance, can achieve at this point in time? Not sure. Can we ask them to develop new theoretical frameworks, which, realistically demands much deeper knowledge than what they get in a term's worth of teaching? Probably not, or even certainly not. Can we ask them to analyze fine-grained data, say interesting things about it that the AI cannot access? Yes. So all of this, points to a very mixed and difficult picture. So if we take this and we try and learn from it, this is what I think what emerges as a picture. So first, it's clear that increasingly ChatGPT is a great tool, but it's a great tool for people that know what they're doing. Um, and that's where it's going to be pushed to the maximum. Students can use it and they will do great things, but they will not learn what we want them to learn, at least not as well. And students are not experts. So what they can do just barely matches what the AI can do and often doesn't go much more beyond. Again, it's highly uneven. Good students can go beyond AI at this point in time. So this poses a problem. And the first main problem that you can identify is that since AI can now create outputs, create, of course, quote unquote, we should accept that creation may no longer be the highest level cognitive and pedagogical task slash output. Instead, some argue that the highest level of cognition that we should expect our students to perform and that we should teach them and emphasize in our teaching and in our assignments is the task of evaluation. So, which is more about actually reflecting on what is already out there, judging and selecting, writing, and saying, okay, this is basically good, or this is empty, or this is fraudulent, or this is strong or weak, or etc. This supports the argument that this and this and this. The other conclusion is that in terms of the actual frontiers that are left, there are not many that we can actually ask students to do and that the AI cannot do. The only one I have identified personally, and I might be biased, but is original data. So taking original data that's not easily accessible by the AI and analyzing it in different ways. And even then, the AI can do some of that, but at least trying to embed that kind of skill. And that's, of course, not enough because not all colleagues will want to do that or will be able to do that in their modules. Not everybody has data that matches their module and the learning outcomes. Not everybody will want to use data. And we shouldn't push, secondary data analysis as like the new norm. And we need solutions that are basically much more scalable in every way for us as teachers under heavy workloads and also pedagogically and widely applicable. So, in my view, it only really realistically, in most cases or on average, leaves partial solutions that are interesting, that might mitigate AI use a little bit, but by no means certainly or absolutely safeguard against AI use. So, um, based on that, here are a list of a few principles that you can try to apply to your assignments based on this review of what we know the AI can or cannot do and what we can try to expect students to do. So first, the starting point should be that when you design an essay or any assignment, it's now going to have to be hyper specific to try and go beyond kind of general output that an AI can do. And the AI can be also hyper specific anyway. So that's not going to solve much, but it should be, I argue, it should be the starting point of your thinking. Basically, that and any assignment, whatever the assignment actually is, whatever you are assessing, it should be laser focused on being hyper specific to try and stimulate students and avoid at least complete, entire AI generated work and things like that. Second, try and use things that the AI cannot use, like I've mentioned, paywall slash fine-grained data, hyper-specific case studies based on the real world that are not easily accessed slash replicable by AI. Operate in settings where the AI cannot be used, if you'd like. We've been discussing at Leeds and elsewhere, oral examinations is one example that might or might not be what you would like to do. It might or might not be easily, done also for a number of reasons. Um, the fourth idea is to emphasize the process rather than the actual output, because AI can now create, quote unquote, the output. You should probably emphasize the process much more, and we should learn to assess and grade that. That process can be AI assisted or not, depending on what you choose. So the assignment might say, you will use AI and reflect on the process and output of AI or not. And I will show you in a moment what that looks like. And last, I suppose one, and this is only a complementary thing, you should emphasize links between the student and the material and the assignment as much as you can. So let me illustrate all these principles with a few examples. But essentially, the key recommendation is that we should kind of pursue these principles and these innovations almost regardless of their potential success in mitigating AI use because they're interesting pedagogically and for other things like employability and things like that. So for a number of objectives that we're pursuing anyway, we should go in that direction essentially. So some examples that operationalize the five principles that I've mentioned before and more, as well as some reflections and results that we've had this year, the year before, which has been marked with very high use of AI. So the first example is the concept of a process folio. I've designed one. It's not something I've invented. Some colleagues elsewhere in the country have been using process folio for quite a few years. This is an assignment that we have proposed as a formative. It can be a summative as well with our postgraduates, which is 95% international students. It's a very difficult cohort. They're good kids, they're interested, but they also face a huge, huge language barrier. So we are trying to use the first term of the year of their 1 year master's degree to progressively develop skills rather than like throwing them in the pit and like saying write an essay that they don't know how to write. So the process folio comes in. The idea is you assess the process or you emphasize the process at least. So what they do is the one that I've designed at least, they're expected to submit 4 to 6 items. Items can be notes, summaries of their readings, draft outlines, draft arguments, mind maps. The idea with the mind map is that it's not something that the AI can do very easily, although again, that window is also closing, I think, because I've seen it from this year, and the mind maps are AI generated, at least in part. And I've heard the students saying as much. So it's an assignment that both, in that case, these items, it tells them to both use AI and not use AI, to both, put that in the open, but also tell them don't use it to think, use it to generate ideas, to generate outlines, but then reflect on them. And this is the goal, especially of the process notes. Each item has process notes attached to them. And the item could be 200 words and the process note could be 200 words. The process notes is the student reflecting on the item to which it's attached and essentially saying, I read this and it made me think about this. this reading or this outline or this argument is going to fit in the wider picture when I will actually be doing the summative in this and that way. I learned this, I'm going to use this in this way, but also I'm not sure yet about this and this and that. The idea of all of this whole package is to desacralize essay writing and to build skills progressively, as I was saying. And I believe it's a really good assignment regardless of the cohort. It might be good, especially for weaker cohorts, if I may use that term, um, and cohorts that are not used to essay writing for any reason, especially if they come from abroad. And the idea is essentially you work with students throughout term, and it should be accompanied with, support throughout. The result, in principle, we know from the literature and colleagues around the country that this is an assignment that can work really well. And I think for AI use, it can mitigate AI use. This first test that we're running right now, and we've just received the student submissions just a few weeks ago, this is our first year running it, does not actually seem to have worked very well with that particular cohort, which again is 95% international students who are wired to AI, who use, in live translation in class, some of them, because they're so behind in their English proficiency, and who are detached from the course and the content very early on, at least some of them. Um, so these process folios were in large part AI generated. So that's the result. Example two is the everyday report that we have in political economy. It's a third year undergraduate assignment, formative. It can also be a summative with a cohort of course, mostly domestic students, but also quite a bit of international students at different language proficiency and levels of academic ability. Um, How does it work? It's quite simple. They write it's an essay about the global economy, but basically it starts from an entry point in their everyday life. It could be a migration experience or them shopping to the mall or the supermarket or them using ChatGPT. Actually, we had one that wrote about this year. They start from this entry point and then they use political economy approaches like Marx, Polanyi, whatever, and they and thematic literature. Let's say if they're writing about coffee, they'll analyze the global supply chain of coffee with a theory of how, it exploits workers in the global south. So they start from the micro, but they very rapidly and almost immediately go to the global. And they start writing in the first person, but it's just an anchor to start usually in the introduction and at different, discrete points in the report. So it's really an essay in disguise. And that's what we tell students. It's an essay in disguise, but because they are trained to take this angle all throughout term, because it's the spirit and the practice of the module that all seminar activities that we prepare are towards that goal of like taking these interesting everyday starting points and then thinking about the global economy. And we do it like we don't, it's not just for fun. We don't just talk about coffee. We talk about complex things of commodification and how, things are commercialized and how companies penetrate every aspect of life and how states struggle to regulate companies. We talk about traditional political economy topics, but in this kind of like increasingly towards this kind of like almost semi-investigative form, rooted in like very interesting empirical material, but always attached, deeply attached to theory. And it's highly successful, at least in my view, and in the view of my colleagues. It's highly successful throughout term. You see it, the students are enthusiastic about the assignment, about the wider module. There's a sense of ownership and curiosity and wonder about how they're going to be able to do this assignment. And we've had the results again, and we've been doing this assignment for a few years. It's just much higher quality in the analysis, in the written work, and less AI use, at least that is that I can detect with my experience. And just because students just have this sense of ownership. So that's quite successful. And I think it can be replicated not to every subfield and module, of course, but the spirit can be there in many modules, I think. So I think it's a good inspiration. The last example is the sector report. So the sector report is in our module on studying companies and the place of companies in capitalism. Again, it's the same postgraduate cohort. So students have to use original paywalled secondary data about companies from business market analytics databases such as Orbis and Passport. So they have data on like shareholders, market size, revenues, things like that, which is like a very business thing. But the colleague that created this, Owen Williams, sort of flipped that and made it into a political economy thing. So they use that other data from like accessible databases like the IMF, the FAO, World Bank, etc. They have to put this to have some of this data in their presentations and in their written sector reports. So they analyze a sector of the economy, like agriculture, and they have to discuss this data and analyze it as political economists to understand, state and capitalism essentially. They're trained to do this before term starts and during term. They're trained to extract Excel data, to clean it, to analyze it. And they're trained to, of course, think like political economists about that data throughout term. I think in terms of results, again, this has been running for a few years now. You can definitely see that it's slightly, at least slightly less AI use. And even if you can feel some of the AI being used to write, especially like throughout to talk about literature and things like that, the actual data bits tells you that the skills are there. Like the students actually have to do this work, at least to some extent. And yeah, it's not perfect, but there's a greater relative certainty that the skills are being embedded, at least in my view. And again, it's not perfect. So just a few points to finish. That's of course a starting point by our attempts to prove our assignments with AI, as which, as you can see, is highly difficult. But what do we actually need to do beyond this and in addition to this? First, I think it's important to note that we know, you will all know from personal experience as well as from the literature, we know that students use AI because either they're stressed slash not confident in their abilities, and especially language proficiency. So the best thing we can do is more generally beyond assignments is to cultivate a learning environment that desacralizes learning and assignments and that is much more positive and less with this idea that, oh, there's a grade and etc. Of course, we are limited in how much we can do that, but I think we should try. We should basically try and cultivate a sense of ownership, of personal involvement, of curiosity, of wonder, joy, excitement about the material, however difficult that material might be, emotionally, politically, intellectually, etc. And finally, of course, well, the real solution will have to be more widely to redefine assignments and learning, I think, and also to give a better structure to everything that we do. So first, with slash regarding AI, we should have students learn how to use AI in general and to do so ethically. And we should have stronger guidelines, clearer guidelines that are either decided with them or at least they're rock solid and transparent so that we can tell you or tell them, this is what we've decided. This is what we think works for you. And this is how we're going to prepare you to the AI world. And that's how we're going to do it for assessments. There needs to be no gray area anymore. And at the moment, there's just too much of a gray area with our university's policies. Without slash before independently of AI too, because I'm not arguing for AI reliance. I'm actually in at some steps of learning, I actually think we need less AI. So they need to learn to think before using AI and to build again these like building blocks generally and at each time that they do actual thinking. And somehow we need to push critical thinking even more, you know, especially when assessing AI output, obviously. And then it becomes learning to think with AI as much as before AI. And we need to present thinking and this skill of evaluate as opposed to create not as opposed, but maybe as a top priority, evaluate is the key skill of the future. Yes, AI can generate stuff. A lot of it is poor quality, a lot of it is good quality. They need to evaluate that and they need to evaluate other things. And that's the skill of the future workplace and the future citizen, essentially. So that's it. And, I don't have all of the answers, but these are just like, thoughts, provisional results. And I would be happy to have your thoughts and have a discussion about it because I think we are fighting a difficult battle that goes without saying. That's it. Thank you for listening.